people in America were hung from trees, and some were slowly burned alive, and school children were let out on their lunch break to watch. And observers took fingers and toes as souvenirs. This is history. This is not Black history. This is not white history. It is American history. It is our history. Now, white people, you and I do not need to feel responsible for what happened, even if our direct ancestors did it. That is their responsibility, and they are dead. We cannot make amends for what they did. Most of them wouldn't want us to anyway. We do not need to apologize for their behavior. They did it. But let me ask you this. How do you feel when someone hides the truth from you because they think you'll cause problems if you find out? What if I told you that stories like these were kept from you as a white person so that you wouldn't get emotional, so that you wouldn't cause trouble? Your Black neighbors already know these stories. If they weren't told in their own schools, they heard it from their parents or their grandparents or their neighbors. You weren't told because they wanted to keep you quiet. How does that make you feel? We are not responsible for what all those dead people did. We should be disgusted, but we're not responsible for it. What we should be furious about is that the truth was edited out of our history books to make us too comfortable to object to what was done, especially in our white schools that were supposed to be so much better. They didn't teach us the truth about racism in America because they didn't want us to do anything about it. They didn't want us to protest or vote for change, because while plenty of white people are racist as hell, the people in power knew that some of us would ask too many questions and make too much noise. So they fed us the lie that slavery ended with the Civil War, that reparations were handled, that the civil rights movement tied it all up with a pretty bow. They told us not to worry our pretty little heads about it. And then they said that today's Black people are just ungrateful. Look at all this great country has given them, and this is how they repay us? We are not responsible for what anyone did 60 years ago. But America, we are responsible for making sure everyone knows what the fuck they did. We are responsible for telling the truth. White people have the right to be pissed off when the facts call for it. Shielding us from the facts so that we don't get upset should make us furious.
White people are finally admitting this, that the ugly truth of their history, they have been taught for so long, because their history deep down has been founded on top of a lot of lies, on top of Black struggle, on top of Black pain, on top of slavery, colonization, and etc. But right now, it can't be hidden anymore. Even white people themselves, they are accepting this, and I'm so happy my white brothers and sisters are coming out and talking about this out loudly and clearly. I'll say this: from the village of Ghana, Kenya, all the way to the States, from Soweto to Detroit, I salute you all. And I see you struggle, I see your strength, I see your beauty, and thank you so much for being here today. Today's message is a little bit serious, it's historical, it's emotional, and some white people, as I just have said, are finally doing something that we thought we will never see. They are admitting their history was built on lies, pains, blood, and all that, that. So, today I'm going to speak with the ancestors, or us. We are going to speak with the ancestors today. Be ready. Be ready, because we are going to walk through the blood-soaked chapters of history. And I'm going to expose the ugly truth. And we will ask the questions that matters the most. Stay tuned. Watch these clips from my white brothers and sisters. And then we come back here with more commentary.
Accurate history is teaching white Americans how white slave owners raped, beat, humiliated, mutilated, murdered, and cannibalized their slaves. Accurate history is teaching that George Washington's false teeth were made out of his slaves' teeth. Accurate history is teaching that Abraham Lincoln may have said some words and signed some shit, but he did not physically do anything to free the slaves. The white abolitionists also often get almost total credit for freeing the slaves. I bet you've never even asked yourself what the slaves were doing to free themselves, and the answer to that is most of the fucking work, including giving the ultimatum of war. But then we get a bunch of white people mad that their kids might feel guilty if we teach real history. It's not about your white child's feelings. Teaching accurate history isn't about white people's feelings, but that does sound like something that someone who's only ever been taught a white glorifying version of history would counter with. Ask why we ever felt like we needed to curate a false version of what white people did and did not do to black people to begin with. And then ask yourself why white-ass politicians are verbally attacking real history by calling it slurs, which is, by default, also the act of calling black people slurs.
And the truth is, white people have been colonized too. Not physically, not economically, but psychologically. They've been conditioned to believe in a history that never happened. A history where they were always the heroes. A history where they were never the villains, and where their victims were villains. And as long as they live inside that fiction, well, they'll continue to perpetuate the same crimes of their past, even without realizing it. Which just means that we're not even talking about past crimes. We're talking about ongoing crimes from the past until today. Like I said, it's a continuum. If there's ever going to be any real change, if there's ever going to be any hope for justice, then so-called white people have to actually learn your history. Not the history that makes you feel proud and makes you feel good, that makes you feel comfortable, but real history, the history that makes you uncomfortable, the history that you've denied all this time. And only when white people know their real history, really know it, then maybe they can begin to take the first steps towards repairing the damage that that history caused.
My name's Kylie, and I'm obviously white. I grew up in a conservative white family, and I know there's been a lot of discourse about whether white people should talk about racism, and here's my argument for why I think that not only should we, but we have to. A lot of racism in white families occurs behind closed doors. I've been over at friends' parents' places and heard them say some pretty obscene things about people of color, assuming that I am on their side simply because I am white. Obviously, this makes for some awkward conversations when I do call them out, but point being, the depths of the racism and the darkness that seeps in deeply into these families can only, in my opinion, truly be exposed by other white people, because they will never be their full racist selves around anyone who is not white. They like to save face publicly and say that they're not racist, but then again, if you go into their homes and you hear the things they say, that would suggest otherwise. I just encourage you, if you're a white person and you know people like this, please say something. Don't just ignore it for fear of conflict.
Most of us learned a distorted history of slavery in school. So as white Americans, most of us don't realize our connection to it. Here's a quick rundown of historical facts I had not been taught. That the North was deeply implicated, that slavery was legal in northern states for over 200 years, that Northerners up and down the economic spectrum made their livings in businesses tied to slave trade and slavery, that Northern mills processed cotton harvested by enslaved people. The Midwest and the West were implicated. They grew food to feed the South, where land was devoted to cash crops like cotton, harvested by the enslaved. Consumers throughout the country were implicated in their everyday purchases of clothing, coffee, sugar, rice, tobacco. People who immigrated from Europe after slavery were implicated. I have Irish, French, and German immigrant ancestors who came to the United States in the 19th century, worked in factories, struggled, but they were given access to the American dream. Why were waves of immigrants flocking here? Because it was the land of opportunity. Why was the economy booming? Why were there jobs? Because it had been built largely on unpaid labor.
Europeans didn't inherit history. They burned it. Not out of ignorance, but because they knew the truth would void the receipts. The truth would collapse the entire storyline. So they rewrote the narrative in powdered wigs, hiding genocides under Latin and renaming every theft as discovery. This wasn't documentation. It was branding. Europeans didn't study other civilizations. They studied how to erase them and still pass the test. The moment they touched a library, it caught fire. Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was looted. The nose of the Sphinx was blown off. They stood over the ruins and declared Africa illiterate. India, Nalanda, one of the world's oldest universities, torched. 9 million manuscripts vanished. Then they published textbooks claiming Europe invented math. Mesoamerica, over 5,000 Maya codices burned in church bonfires, called satanic, and then centuries later copied for European astronomy. Mali, Timbuktu had more written texts than all of medieval Europe, and France buried them in sand until African scholars smuggled them out in the dark to preserve their own knowledge from European archivists. This isn't history. This is a global arson scene, and the suspects kept the ashes. They didn't just erase, they rebranded. Algebra becomes Western math. Optics becomes Galileo's dream. Surgery, astronomy, navigation, pulled from Arabic, African, and Asian sources, stripped of origin, and resold in powdered French as the Enlightenment. They erased the Ethiopian roots of early Christianity, the Nubian queens who governed astronomical calendars, the zero-based logic of India, the land stewardship of the Haudenosaunee, the feminist inheritance of the Ibwa, and replaced it all with a montage of pale men thinking in cellars. They didn't progress. They plagiarized and pretended to be the source. The Renaissance wasn't a rebirth. It was a break-in. While Europe was still exercising women for having dreams, the Islamic world had hospitals, legal scholarship, chemistry labs, and academic peer review. And when Europe finally woke up, it did so by translating Arabic texts, texts that had already preserved Greek, Indian, Persian, and African thought. Ibn Sina becomes a father of medicine with a Latin name. Ibn al-Haytham becomes a precursor to optics, even though his work predates Descartes by half a millennium. This wasn't a rediscovery. It was relay theft, with the baton of knowledge passed through fire, and then whitewashed mid-sprint. Even their maps lied. The Mercator projection stretches Europe, shrinks Africa, and centers the world around imperial delusion. The Middle East is only middle if Europe is the sun. Western civilization includes Australia and Canada, but not Ethiopia and Mexico, even though they had alphabets before Greek even existed. They called Africa tribal and forgot Europe was governed by inbred warlords in muddy castles with no plumbing. They called Haiti violent and named cities after Napoleon. They called indigenous science myth and European mythology canon. They stole bronze from Benin, called it art preservation, and then locked it behind glass and slapped a plaque on it that says gift. Stolen artifacts were labeled generous. Massacres were called missions. Human trafficking was called trade. This isn't historical confusion. It's weaponized curriculum. The lies are maintenance. The truth would collapse the floorboards. Because if the world knew that Europe industrialized slavery and called itself abolitionist, if they knew that democratic indigenous governments were destroyed to install monarchies and puppet regimes, if they knew that Europe's civilizing missions involved famine, sterilization, language erasure, museum theft, and state-engineered extinction campaigns, then there would be nothing left to claim. No moral ground, no myth of progress, just receipts written in blood and buried under their museums. This is why their timelines start with Plato and end with Churchill. Why every world history class skips from Greece to Galileo like nothing of value happened in those 2,000 years between, unless it was white and male and drawing triangles. Europe didn't document history. It hunted it and locked it in glass. It renamed it And when we speak the truth out loud, we get banned from TikTok. But this isn't revision. This is restoration. We're not studying Europe. We're surviving its edits.
Welcome back. Now, before you go into a discussion, first of all, I want you to comment down there. What do you think about this topic? Tell me down there, and where are you watching from? So before I discuss the apologies that white people are putting out there, because once you realize their history and you realize that you have been living fake, you have been living in a lie because of the pain of another one, that's automatically asking for forgiveness. Because first step of asking for forgiveness is accepting. Sometimes I say, all these white brothers and sisters who come out and speak the truth out, that means they are accepting their mistake. That is first step of apology. So, white supremacy was not just prejudice or ignorance. White supremacy was intentional, organized global operation to dominate black bodies, black lands, cultures, and spirit. So, the transatlantic slave trade wasn't just kidnapping, it was human trafficking on a genocide scale. I may call it that, or that's how I call it. It was spiritual terrorism, it was psychological welfare, it was cultural erasure. A lot of things happened between the transatlantic slave trade. It was not just about kidnapping and going to work to the lands. It's not that they wanted people to work for them. No. It was more than just working. They stole the names, they banned the languages, they whipped the memory of Africa out of our children, black American children. They built palaces with black people bones. They sang hymns while black people were chained. That is the reality. Now, what the system did, they told the world that black people or black is inferior. They told the people that Africa is savage. Europe is civilized. White Jesus approved this. And that lie shaped the world. I want something to sink in. A global hierarchy was constructed to elevate whiteness and humanize blackness. And it was enforced through law, religion, science, education, and violence. When institutions thought that black people will never find out the truth, white institutions thought that. They lied on textbooks showing happy slaves and heroic colonizers. They lied in churches preaching white Jesus while ignoring the African presence in the Bible. They lied in media, casting Africans as poor, dirty, violent while hiding the stolen diamonds under European crowns. Even their museums are filled with stolen African artifacts labeled as discoveries. What did you discover? But now the world is waking up. Black youths are reading Marcus Garvey. We are doing that. We are watching documentaries about Patrice Lumumba, about Malcolm X. Black people are decoding how Nelson Mandela was labeled as terrorist by the West that now honors him. They labeled him as the West, but now are honoring him when he's no more. Why? Black or African youths are now learning that France changed Haiti billions of dollars. France charged Haiti billions of dollars for daring to escape slavery. And now, some white people can't sleep at night. Some white people cannot be comfortable because they realize everything they were told was a lie. Let me break down something here. The types of apologies we are seeing from white people. The guilty-ridden individuals. This is the white person who starts crying on camera and they say, I didn't know my ancestors were slave owners. I'm ashamed. They share their grief, but often stop there. No action, no reparation. Another form of apology is the educated allies. These white people read, research, and use their privilege to educate others. They show up in protests. They fight curriculum change. They understand that their comfort was built on black pain. The other set of apology is the strategic apologists. These ones aren't sorry. They are scared of losing power, scared of global black unity. They say sorry to keep the peace, but they want to give up control. Another type we call institutional confession. Some schools, companies, and churches are now apologizing for their role in slavery. For example, there's this university I wrote down. Come on. Is it Georgetown University? Georgetown University. They admitted they sold enslaved Africans to pay debts. The Church of England admitted it invested in slavery. Some Ivy League universities confess that their founders were slave owners. Apologies are starting to roll in. But ask yourself, what are they doing after they say sorry? Because true apology must lead to restoration. And this is what some white people are finally saying out loud, that we stole your land, we bought your women, we erased your history, we built our wealth from your unpaid labor. A lot of things they are saying. We told the world that you are dangerous when we are the danger. By the way, between white people and black people, who are dangerous? So they are now confessing that entire cities, nations, and empires were built on African bonds. And they are realizing that without slavery and colonization, Europe would have remained cold, underdeveloped, and irrelevant. They are seeing that despite it all, black people are still rising. Apology without reparation is disrespect. That's what I always say. Apology without reparation is disrespect. Imagine someone burning your house down, steals your furniture, and then years later, he comes there and says, I'm sorry, but I'm keeping the house. And that's what Western powers did to Africa and the African diaspora. Reparation aren't about handouts. Reparation, they're about payback, about balance, about restoration. And true reparation must include land return, free education, economic investment, debt cancellation, healthcare access, rewriting global history books, and more and more. Anything less is just performances. But here is good news. Some white people are truly waking up. They are attending Pan-African conferences. They are decolonizing their churches. They are funding black-owned businesses. They are calling out their racist family members at dinner tables. They are standing up in classrooms to challenge colonial narrative. They understand that liberation is not about guilty, it's about justice. And that I am happy they are saying this to some white people. If we benefited from the crimes, we must be part of the repair. Some are even moving out of power positions to allow black people to lead. Some, not all. But remember this, my black people, we don't want or we don't wait on them. We thank the ones who support truth, but we don't depend on them. To my all black Africans, brothers and sisters, and to my all black people, this is our time to rise unapologetically. We don't need permission to speak. We don't need validation to speak. We don't need white tears to tell us our truth is real. As I say, first thing foremost, teach your children the real history. Rebuild Africa with pride. The future is in Africa, and with African mind leading it. Build global black unity. From Jamaica to Nairobi, from South Africa to Atlanta, one voice, one fight. Let's create our own media and educative system, hold apologists accountable. Heal but never forget. Forgive if you want, but never forget what was done. Across the world, I see the truth that once sat quietly in dusty books and sacred conversation are now spreading like wildfire. What used to be whispered in undergoing Pan-African meetings is now being shouted on global platforms. And here is the most powerful part. The more white people wake up, the more they forced to confront each other. And the system is shaking with this. Because when black people speak, they are like, oh, they are making noise, blah, blah, blah. But when it's coming from their own, it is shaking even their own. So this isn't just black demanding truth anymore. It is white people confronting their own families, their institution, their own comfort. You imagine growing up believing that you are from a noble family only to discover your ancestors were colonizers or plantation owners. And that's what is happening right now. Some white youths are breaking down after learning their trust funds came from slavery profits. Some teachers are rewriting their entire lesson plan. Some politicals or politicians are shaking because the next generation is not staying silent. It is not. Across the world right now, I'm sure white families are fighting at the dinner table. The young generations, Gen Z and millennials, are asking questions their grandparents can't answer. Why is there a painting of slave plantation in our houses? Why did great granddad fight against civil rights? Why do we still own land that was stolen from indigenous and African people? A lot of questions that you cannot answer. Some white elders respond with shame, others respond with anger, denial, fear, because To admit the truth will mean tearing down the lies their entire identity was built on. And that's why some people say the history of black people or the history of white people, it only depends on black people. While you accept that you did this, that means you are erasing your identity, you are erasing your history. They always tell us that the history of black people started with slavery and colonization, but it is not true. The history of white people started with slavery and colonization. That is the reality. So crystal clear is that we don't care about apologies without power distribution. Saying sorry is not enough when the same system still exists. I'll say this, black schools are still underfunded up to now. Black neighborhoods are still overpoliced. Black workers are still underpaid. African countries are still trapped in these colonial debts. Black lives are still being taken without justice. When they apologize, we need to ask, why or what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up your unearned wealth, your colonial land, or your privilege in politics? What do we earn as black people? Because an apology without a sacrifice is manipulation. We have seen it before. They apologize during election time. They kneel for photos. They take photo. I'm kneeling down to say sorry to my black friends. At the end of the day, nothing happened. They even cry on camera. Then fund anti-black policies behind closed doors. And black diaspora has the role in this moment. This moment isn't just about white people apologizing. It's about how black people respond. Across the diaspora, or in the US, Caribbean, European, Latin America, and Africa, we must unite our voices. We must remember we are one people, stolen and scattered, but still connected. The system that oppressed us in Brazil is the same system that enslaved our ancestors in Congo. The same Europe that colonized Africa oppressed black British and black French communities. But now it's our time. It's our time to share the knowledge across borders, build businesses together, reclaim African identity, support land reparation, and demand justice as one global family. This is not about revenge. This is about return. Return to dignity, return to wholeness, return to each other. I'll say this. We are not begging for acceptance. We are building our own future. Schools in Ghana, we are building tech in Nigeria, buying lands in Kenya, farming in Tanzania, creating media in Atlanta. We are doing this. So I think we are on the right place. This is our moment. So if they want to apologize, let them apologize. We love that. I love that. And because black people will not come through guilty. It will come through organization, unity, truth, and spiritual power. I'll say this. You were stolen, lied, and suppressed. But you are rising now as black people. Till next episode, peace out.